When police canine dogs were mysteriously getting sick, Detective Victoria uncovered the darkest secret. Detective Victoria Reyes and her canine partner, Sable, uncover a deadly conspiracy when a series of unexplained illnesses strike the department's dogs. The investigation reveals corrupt officers using the canines for illegal drug tests. With danger closing in, Victoria risks everything to expose the truth, but it's Sable's bravery that ultimately brings the dark scheme to light. Victoria Reyes paced back and forth in the police station's break room, her mind racing. The morning had been chaotic, and the news about the K9 unit dogs was spreading like wildfire. Victoria had never seen anything like this before. Dogs she had worked with for years, strong, reliable, and smart, were suddenly showing signs of illness. Some were sluggish, unable to even finish their routines. Others had seizures, their bodies jerking uncontrollably. The worst part? Some had died. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Sable, her canine partner, scratching at the door. The large black dog's nose peeked through, his brown eyes full of concern. Victoria could tell something was wrong. She had been watching him closely ever since the first reports came in. "Sable, come here, boy," Victoria called, her voice low. Sable hesitated, stepping into the room with a slow gait. Normally, he was energetic, moving confidently by her side. But today, he looked weak. His usual excitement was replaced with a sluggish walk. Victoria bent down, running her fingers through his thick coat. His fur felt a little less soft, and he seemed to be breathing harder than usual. The alarm bells in her mind started ringing. This wasn't just any sickness, it was something different. "What's going on with you?" she muttered, more to herself than to Sable. She had been working with canines for years, and she knew these dogs inside and out. Sable, in particular, was her partner, her best friend on the job. He had been by her side through countless investigations, his sharp instincts saving them both more times than she could count. This didn't feel like an ordinary illness. Victoria quickly stood up, her eyes scanning the room for any answers. She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Williams, the veterinarian who treated the canines. The line clicked, and the vet's voice came through. "Dr. Williams, it's Detective Reyes. We've got a problem. The canines are getting sick. It's spreading fast. Have you seen anything like this before?" There was a long pause. "Nothing like it. I've tested the blood samples from several dogs, and there's no clear cause. No infections, no poisons. It's a mystery." Victoria's gut twisted. She felt something deep in her bones, something that told her this wasn't just bad luck. Someone had to be behind this. "Keep me updated, Doc. I'm going to dig into it myself," she said firmly. As she hung up, Victoria felt a surge of determination. She couldn't stand by and watch as the dogs she loved and worked with deteriorated. If there was something going on here, something hidden, she would find it. Victoria reached out to the other canine handlers at the precinct, trying to find any common thread. The results were all the same. The dogs had been trained using a batch of new equipment provided by Postek Enterprises, a supplier they had been using for months. That was the only link between the dogs that had fallen ill. Sable, standing by her side, gave her a look that was both trusting and worried. Victoria scratched behind his ears, whispering, "We're going to get to the bottom of this, boy. I promise you." As she dug deeper into the records, she discovered more troubling signs. Postek Enterprises was a large company, and it had provided several batches of gear to the precinct recently. But something about the equipment felt off to Victoria. There was something hidden in the details, something the supplier wasn't telling them. She picked up the phone again, dialing a contact in the department's supply chain team. "Hey, Marco. I need to know everything about Postek Enterprises. Have they ever had any complaints about their products? Any reports of faulty equipment or concerns?" There was a pause before Marco replied, "No complaints that I've seen. But I can dig through the records and get back to you. I need answers, Marco. This is serious." As the conversation ended, Victoria stood up, Her eyes locked on the door where Sable was waiting. His condition was getting worse. Her loyal partner could barely keep his eyes open. The rest of the canines were in the same state, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. But who and why? Victoria didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just some coincidence. She wasn't going to stop until she figured out what was causing this, no matter what it took. The next day, Victoria met with Dr. Williams again. He had some results to share, but they weren't what she expected. I've tested several more dogs. Their conditions are getting worse. The tests came back negative, but I found something strange in their blood work. It's like they've been exposed to something unnatural. Victoria's mind raced. She had seen the evidence with her own eyes. The dogs were getting sick, and she had to know why. That's what I'm afraid of, Doc, Victoria said, her jaw set with determination. I'm going to find out who's behind this. As she left the vet's office, her phone buzzed. Marco had sent her the records she requested. As she read through them, she found something that made her blood run cold. Paws Tech Enterprises had recently made a delivery of equipment, but it wasn't just for canine training. It was for something bigger. The deeper Victoria dug, the more dangerous the situation became. It wasn't just about sick dogs anymore. It was about something much larger, something that could shake the very foundations of the department. The pieces were slowly coming together, but they didn't form a picture she liked. It was a tangled web of corruption, deceit, and greed, all rooted in a place she once thought was built on integrity. And with every new discovery, the stakes grew higher. Victoria and Sable moved through the precinct, carefully observing their fellow canine handlers. The tension was palpable. People who had once been her colleagues, friends even, now acted strange, nervous, hesitant, avoiding eye contact. Something was off. She could feel it in her bones. One by one, she spoke with the other handlers, trying to piece together what had happened. All the dogs that had fallen ill had one thing in common: the new training equipment from Paws Tech Enterprises. It was the only variable that linked them all. Victoria couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was hiding something far worse than a simple batch of defective gear. Victoria met up with Ben Mitchell, her old friend, and now a trusted investigative reporter. She shared her suspicions, and he agreed to help her dig deeper. They spent hours poring over Paws Tech's business dealings, combing through contract and purchase orders. Something stood out. The supplier had recently been awarded a large contract, one that didn't quite match the typical process for the department. Ben didn't take long to find a troubling detail. The supplier's records didn't add up. There were inconsistencies in the dates, numbers that didn't match, and orders that had been made under unusual circumstances. As he sifted through more documents, Victoria couldn't help but notice the name that kept coming up: Chief Michael Roberts. He was listed as a contact for the department's K9 unit purchases, and the orders from Paws Tech had been approved with his signature. Victoria's suspicion turned to certainty. Chief Roberts was involved, and this wasn't just about defective equipment or a string of bad luck. It was a setup, something deliberate. But what? And why? She needed to know more. The answers weren't easy to find, and with every door she knocked on, it felt like she was being shut out even harder. One evening, as Victoria sat in her office, reviewing the growing pile of evidence, a knock on the door broke her concentration. It was Marco, the supply chain contact she had reached out to earlier. "I've been digging into Paws Tech," Marco said, his voice low, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I found something. Late last night, I discovered a meeting between Roberts and someone from Paws Tech. They met at a hotel in the city. It's all on security footage." Victoria's mind raced as she considered the implications. She thanked Marco, and together they set a plan to get the footage. She couldn't afford to wait for someone else to bring it to light. If Roberts was involved, there was no time to lose. But as the hours ticked by, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It wasn't just a matter of malfunctioning equipment or a corrupt officer. No, this was a much darker story, one that stretched across the department. The canines were part of something more, something that was hidden beneath layers of deception and illegal activity. Victoria tracked down an insider at Postek Enterprises, someone she could trust. The meeting was tense, but the person confirmed her suspicions. The training gear wasn't just for canines, the insider whispered. There was a chemical agent in the equipment. It was meant for crowd control, but they were testing it on the dogs. It's experimental stuff, something they're trying to sell to the government for human use. They thought no one would notice. Her stomach churned. It was worse than she thought. The dogs weren't just getting sick. They were part of an experiment, and Roberts was involved in it. They had been exposed to dangerous chemicals, and the side effects were killing them. Victoria stood up, her hands shaking with rage. I need more. Everything you've got. The insider handed her a flash drive, then disappeared into the shadows. Victoria felt a wave of anger flood her. They had been using these dogs, her partners, like guinea pigs for a drug test. There was no way she was going to let this go, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed proof, and she needed to act fast. As she returned to her car, the phone rang. It was Ben. His voice was urgent. Victoria, listen to me. I've been getting calls, threats. Someone's onto you. They know you're getting close to the truth. She cursed under her breath. The pressure was building. Roberts and Postek were making their move, and she knew they wouldn't hesitate to stop her. But she had no choice now. She had to keep pushing forward. That night, as she sat at her desk, going through the files again, she received an unexpected visit, Chief Michael Roberts. He knocked sharply on her office door, his face unreadable. Detective Reyes, he said, stepping inside. We need to talk. Victoria stood, heart pounding. She didn't trust him, not after everything she had discovered. But she played it cool, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. About what? She asked, keeping her voice neutral. He took a step closer, his tone softening. I know you're looking into the canines, Victoria. I know you're trying to find answers, but you need to stop. This is bigger than you think. Trust me on this one. Victoria felt a chill spread through her. He wasn't asking her to stop. He was ordering her. But she wouldn't back down. Not now. Not when she was so close. You don't scare me, Roberts, she replied firmly. You've made a lot of people sick, and I'm going to expose everything. He studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. You'll regret this. With that, Roberts turned and left, his footsteps heavy in the hallway. Victoria knew that time was running out. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. But she had one ally left, Ben. She called him, telling him to meet her at the safe house. The words barely left her lips when the line clicked off. She felt the pressure mounting. Each step she took felt heavier, every breath more labored. The conspiracy was closing in, the noose tightening around her and Sable. She could feel the weight of the investigation pressing on her chest as the shadows seemed to close in around her, not just from the outside world, but from within her own department. Sable stood beside her, his coat now noticeably thinner, his energy fading. Victoria could barely bring herself to look at him, knowing that every minute they wasted could be the one that pushed him too far. But there was no time to dwell on that. Her focus needed to remain sharp. She needed to end this. The safe house was quiet, a place she hoped would offer some solace from the chaos that followed her everywhere. Yet even there, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There had been too many close calls, too many people who had tried to silence her. Ben arrived a little later than she expected, his face more tense than usual. He walked briskly toward the door, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone to follow him. I came as fast as I could, Ben said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. You look like you've been through hell. Victoria didn't answer. Instead, she gestured to the table where several files lay open. She needed Ben to understand just how far this had gone. She couldn't afford to waste time with pleasantries. I've been digging into the evidence. It's worse than I thought, she said quietly, keeping her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. Ben sat down beside her, flipping through the files she had compiled. As he scanned the documents, his face grew pale. "You're telling me they've been testing drugs on the canines? And Roberts isn't on it?" Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Every word felt like a punch in the gut. She had spent years working alongside these people, and now she was faced with the realization that those same people were the ones causing all this harm. Chief Michael Roberts, the man she had once trusted, was the mastermind behind it all. Ben closed the folder with a snap, his eyes meeting Victoria's. "I can't believe this. They'll stop at nothing to cover their tracks. You're lucky they haven't found you yet." Victoria leaned back in her chair, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of dread building in her stomach. She had been lucky so far, but that wouldn't last forever. "I have to expose them, Ben. I can't let this go," she said, her voice resolute. "But every time I get closer to the truth, it feels like they're one step ahead." Ben ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn. "I know. I've been getting calls too, people asking about the investigation. They're worried about you, Victoria. You're not safe. I don't care." "The canines are dying," Victoria replied, her eyes burning with determination. "And Sable. He's not going to make it if I don't stop this." Her words hung in the air for a moment, both of them silent as the gravity of the situation settled between them. Sable let out a soft growl, his head resting heavily on Victoria's lap. His breathing was slow, labored. He had been through too much already, and it seemed there was no end in sight. Ben's expression softened, but he knew the stakes. "All right, what's the next step?" "We need to get this information into the right hands. You can't fight this alone." Victoria's eyes met his. "I need the final piece of evidence. There's a file in the precinct's evidence room. If I can get my hands on it, it'll be the proof I need to bring Roberts and the others down." Ben's face hardened. "And how are you planning on getting in there? You know they'll be watching every move you make." "I don't have a choice," Victoria replied, her voice firm. "I've already been followed, and I can't risk anyone else getting hurt. This has to end now." Sable let out a soft whine, his eyes full of confusion. Victoria knelt beside him, running a hand through his fur. It was getting harder to keep her emotions in check, knowing that Sable might not make it through this. "I'll go tonight," Victoria continued, her tone resolute. "I'll get the file, and I'll expose everything. I have to." Ben didn't say anything at first, but when he spoke, his voice was low. "I'll help you however I can. Just be careful, okay?" Victoria gave him a brief nod. "I'll be fine. We can't stop now." Ben left shortly after, promising to stay in contact. As Victoria stood in the empty room, a cold determination settled over her. The more she uncovered, the more the web of corruption spread. There was no turning back now. She had to finish what she started, no matter what it cost her. The night was her only chance. She knew that the longer she waited, the more time Roberts and his network had to cover their tracks. But as she prepared for the risky mission ahead, she realized there was no room for doubt. This wasn't just about Sable anymore. This was about exposing a conspiracy that threatened the lives of countless others. She glanced at the clock. The hour was near, and the risks were high. But she had no choice. It was time to take the fight to them. Victoria took a deep breath, looking at Sable as he lay quietly beside her, his condition worsening with each passing day. There was no more time to waste. She had to expose the conspiracy, not just for the canines, but for everything they stood for. Victoria had already made the decision to break into the precinct's evidence room. She couldn't trust anyone anymore, especially after the warning from Chief Michael Roberts. He was trying to intimidate her into silence, but she was past the point of fear. The canines were being used as test subjects in a much larger scheme, one that involved powerful people with everything to lose. She had seen enough to know that Roberts and his allies were willing to do anything to keep their secrets safe. With the evidence she had gathered, Victoria knew that the truth was within reach. A video file was locked away in the evidence room, containing footage of a secret meeting between Chief Roberts, officials from Postec Enterprises, and several city leaders. In it, they discussed the illegal testing of crowd control chemicals on the canines. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the proof she needed to bring everything to light. Victoria stood, her hands steady despite the overwhelming pressure. She glanced once more at Sable, who gave her a weak but trusting look. They had been through so much together, and tonight, they would see it through to the end. As she moved towards the door, she hesitated for a moment. This was dangerous, more dangerous than anything she had done so far. But the thought of the canines suffering any longer, of Sable growing weaker by the day, spurred her into action. They couldn't wait any longer. Victoria moved through the shadows, careful to avoid any patrols that might be on duty. The precinct was quieter than usual, most of the officers too afraid to speak up or too loyal to Roberts to oppose him. But Victoria knew that the deeper she dug, the fewer allies she had. She had to rely on herself and Sable. When they reached the evidence room, Victoria felt her pulse quicken. It was the moment of truth. She'd broken into places before, but never like this. The weight of the situation made her hands shake, but she forced herself to steady them. She pulled out her lock-picking tools, her eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. She could hear nothing but the distant hum of the air conditioning. It was eerily quiet, and for a moment, she wondered if someone had been tipped off. But there was no turning back now. Victoria worked quickly, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked as it swung inward. She stepped inside, her eyes immediately locking onto the file cabinets against the far wall. She knew what she was looking for, the folder containing the video that would expose Roberts and his allies. Sable remained by her side, his gaze fixed on the door as if he, too, was aware of the stakes. Every second felt like an eternity, but they couldn't afford to waste time. Victoria moved through the room, pulling out drawer after drawer, scanning the labels. Then, at last, she found it. A thick manila folder marked with a date and time, exactly what she needed. She grabbed it and shoved it into her bag, moving toward the door with the same careful steps she had taken to enter. But just as she reached the door, she heard a sound that made her freeze. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Victoria quickly looked around, her mind racing for an escape plan. She couldn't afford to get caught now. She had the evidence. She had to get out. She signaled to Sable, and together they retreated into the shadows, holding their breath. Victoria's heart hammered in her chest as the footsteps grew louder. The door opened, and two officers walked in, unaware of her presence. They were talking in low voices, unaware that the walls had ears. Victoria held still, willing herself to stay silent, praying they wouldn't find her. The officers passed by, their conversation completely focused on something else. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They were safe for now, but she knew they had to move fast. She pushed the door open just a little, peering out into the hallway. When it was clear, she made her move, slipping out into the shadows. She had the evidence, but there was still one more hurdle to overcome, getting it to the public. As Victoria made her way toward the exit, the sound of radio static broke the silence. Someone was calling in, and their voice carried over the airwaves. "Victoria Reyes," the voice crackled. "She's gone rogue. We need to find her. She's getting too close to the truth." Victoria's blood ran cold. They knew she was onto them. She and Sable were marked targets now. But there was no going back. The truth had to come out, no matter what it took. She and Sable ran through the back corridors of the precinct, her mind sharp and focused despite the danger. She could hear footsteps behind them, growing louder as the officers closed in. But they were too slow. Victoria had the lead, and she wasn't going to let them catch her. With one final push, they reached the exit. Victoria shoved open the door, the cold night air rushing at them. But just as she stepped outside, she saw a car parked nearby, headlights flashing on a group of officers emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. They had nowhere to run, but then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Sable broke free from her side. He lunged at one of the officers, knocking him to the ground in a blur of fur and muscle. Victoria's heart skipped a beat. She knew this was their chance. "Go, Sable," she shouted, her voice hoarse. Sable stood tall, his powerful form ready to defend them both. The officers hesitated, unsure of what to do. It was a brief but intense standoff, and in that moment, Victoria knew they had a fighting chance. As the officers hesitated, Victoria grabbed the file from her bag and raised it high. "This is the evidence that will expose everything. You're done." The officers froze, their eyes shifting between her and Sable. They knew it was over. And in that instant, the truth was finally out.